My name is Ida Heezoff. I was born on September 20th, 1918. My maiden name was Ida Gorelick. My parents were Ben and Rose Gorelick. They both came from Russia. They weren't married there, they were married here. My mother was only about maybe 15 or 16 when they came. I think it was before 1913 because she remembers when they had a tornado here in 1913. And my father came a little before then, and he lived with his sister. Her name was, we called her Aunt Freda. Her last name was Katzman, and they lived in South Omaha.
Do you remember how or why your parents came to Omaha?
My father came because he wanted to get away from being in the Russian army. My mother, they just decided to come because my mother had a brother here, and so they wanted them all to come here, not stay there. So my mother came, and her family, her brothers and sisters, her father and mother. But my father came, his sister was already here, so he came to her. But I never saw my grandfather. Only my grandmother did come here on my father's side. And she lived with her daughter Katzman for a long time.
Do you remember your grandparents very well?
Oh, of course. My grandmother was little like I am, and she always wore a shawl. And my grandfather had a long beard, and he read the Bible all the time.
Did you speak Yiddish in the house?
Yes, a little bit. I can still speak it a little bit, but I understand it. But I don't speak it as well as I used to. But sometimes when I used to work downtown and I hear two women talking, they might have been talking German, I could tell what they were talking because they're so like Jewish, But no, but usually by the time we went to school, we were talking a little, but we always talked English because my mother was going to night school and she wanted to talk English too. But once in a while they came out with a few Jewish words. And I know when I used to go to my grandparents, not my grandparents, my husband's, they would talk Russian if they wanted us not to know anything.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had two brothers and two sisters. My one brother passed away a couple of years ago. He was Charles, and he never married. But he came to Omaha when he retired, and he lived near me. I lived in the, Embassy Court, and my sister lived there. And he lived 2 blocks down in a new apartment, so we always got together. But he passed away 2 years ago, and my sister decided to go live in Kansas City with her daughter. But I still have a brother in California, Harry, but he doesn't travel very much because he's not too well. And I have another sister, Lorraine, who lives in Kansas City also, Overland Park. So I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was a twin when I was born, but she died shortly after birth.
Tell me a little bit about growing up.
Growing up, well, it was Depression time, so money did not come easy in those days. And my dad, was like a fruit man, went to the market and he sold the fruit and everything. But I remember when he had horses, and my dad used to clear his throat when he went in to see the horses, and the horses would say something back to him because they knew he was coming. He'd clear his throat and they knew it was him. That was a long time ago, in the 20s. But we grew up all right, but not like kids today because in the Depression times it was hard, But even so, my dad managed, and we used to live in a flat on 20th and Clark. But one time we had a big flood there because it rained so hard it came in our apartment because we lived on the bottom floor. And I remember sitting on the dining room table. I was 5 years old, and my uncle Max Shames, that was his name, he took me upstairs to their apartment because of the flood. And the circus was in town that year, and it got flooded because it was over there on 20th and Paul Street. I can remember that. And then finally we moved over to the house on Sherwood Avenue, and I started in the 2nd grade to Lake School. And I still remember some of my teachers' names from there. Miss Achmuty was my 8th grade teacher, and Miss Brooks was my 5th grade teacher, and Miss Blanchard was my 4th grade teacher.
Do you remember some of your schoolmates while you were at...
Well, Joe Gus, who lives here, he was one of the school, went to Lake School, was in my class, and so was Annette Foreman, Frank. her brother lives here now too. I remember she was in my class, and Jack Epstein, he was in my class, all in at Lake School. And then I had a real good girlfriend. She was Chinese. Her name was Irene. And who else? Can't remember any more kids.
Do you remember going to the synagogue as a young person?
To 19th and Bird and 18th in Chicago, and to the Capella Show on 24th and, well, I don't remember 24th Street, but I remember the other two. And my grandmother used to come sit upstairs. We sat upstairs, all the women. And she used to always bring, even if it was Yom Kippur, she would bring us a sack of goodies because she didn't want us to go without eating, but of course she didn't eat. She said, it's all right if you eat, you're little and you need your food.
How did you get back and forth to the
We
synagogue?
walked, because we didn't have cars in those days. And besides, we knew we had to walk, so we walked. We walked from Sherwood Avenue to 18th in Chicago to 9th in the Bird. You know, the kids walk back and forth everywhere. So we used to do that.
Were there a lot of Jewish people living in your neighborhood?
No, there weren't. Down this, yeah, on Grant Street, Julie, her name was, maiden name was Julie Fishbane, and she's Julie Shapiro now. You probably know her, don't you? And there was Herman Weinstein lived in back of us, his family, and another couple families, but not too many, you know. But Lake School was all full of Jewish people because they came from the other side, like 20th Street and 24th Street, all that way, you know.
Were there any Jewish businesses around you?
Not me, but down on 24th Street there was Adler's and Forbes Bakery and Adler's and Meat Market. Everything was down there. But my dad used to go down there and get meat and stuff. We always got our meat there. And I always kept kosher too because we used to go to Diamonds to get our meat. My husband used to go on Sunday morning and bring everything for the week.
How about when you were going to grade school? Do you remember some of your experiences while you were there?
Well, not a whole lot. I remember we had a fire drill and we went down on that outside thing. It had a big old building and then they had built an addition. It was a new building. And the old building had this thing curved and we used to go down there.
You'd slide down?
Uh-huh. They'd do it for us for a fun day sometimes. And then, I can't remember too many things. Well, we had 8th grade then too. You know, they didn't have that many junior high schools at that time. And, well, I don't know. They, you know, don't remember too much. I remember my teachers and I remember a few other things, what they did. But, you know, we didn't, like today, you had Hanukkah and you talked about it. We didn't even talk about it when we went to school because people didn't know about it and we didn't discuss it. And it was just like Christmas, the holidays. They had their songs and everything, but I don't know if I don't think I ever was in any programs though. Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about your mother and father?
Well, my father was good to us, but he was very stern. You know, he didn't believe anything. He was from the old school, but my mother wasn't. My mother was. She wanted us to do things that we're supposed to do, you know. So, but my mother went to night school, and she worked for a company when she came called Bemis Bag. I don't know if they're still around today or not. So she worked there till she got married, and then of course she stayed home. But she was always, the first thing she said to us, you must learn to read. So she made us go to the library as often as we could, and we walked to 19th and Harney from where we live. You know where Sherwood Avenue is? It's on 16th by 16th and Lake Street. And we used to walk to the library. She made us go read. She said, it's more important that you read books than you do anything else. So that's why we were good readers, especially my other sister. She liked to read more than I did, but we read a lot. And we went to Central High School for high school.
Do you remember the Jewish holidays growing up?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We used to have Yontif all the time when it was. My dad used to get something good for us, you know, but we didn't make it real big because, yeah, we did too. My other sister used to live here. When the kids were little, my kids and her kids, we all lived here, but they all went away someplace else. But, you know, it's kind of hard to remember some of the holidays when I was growing up, a little bit, you know. It comes back a little.
When you finished Lake School, where did you go
I
to
went
high school?
to Central. But, you know, for Hanukkah, we didn't give good presents like they gave us money, and that was for Hanukkah, because it was Hanukkah gelt, you know. But we didn't go into it like they do today. But we kept, my mother, we had kosher meat and stuff, and we would have Friday night dinner and stuff. And then when my kids were growing up, we always had Friday night dinner, and we went to the synagogue for holidays. But Hanukkah was a big thing, and Yom Tov was a big thing, you know.
Do you remember the Friday night dinners growing up?
Yeah, we always had challah, and we always had chicken, like I had when I had my home. But then later, when I got married, the holidays were always over at his folks' house, his grandparents' house. And they used to, they never seemed to end. They would go on endlessly. You know, it'd be so late when we'd go home with the children.
What do you remember about where you lived as a young person?
Well, I lived, like I said, I was born, we lived in a different house. I was born at home, my twin sister and I, but all the other children weren't. They were born in hospitals. But I was born at home. And actually, I was born in 1918, and there was a big epidemic of flu then. And I think that's when my sister probably passed away. Or maybe she was sick, I don't know. I don't remember that place because I was in, but I remember the flats where you lived on 20th and Grace, upstairs and then downstairs, and we lived in the downstairs.
What kind of heat did you have?
You know what? I couldn't tell you that. Probably a coal furnace, I imagine, because when we moved over to the house that I grew up in, we had a coal furnace. Then my dad changed it into a gas furnace. Yeah, we had a coal furnace. But I think everybody had coal furnaces in those days. Maybe big apartments. Oh, and when we moved over to, there was a big apartment on the corner called Fairfax Apartments. But a lot of that stuff is gone now.
What do you remember about going to the grocery store, going to the butcher shop?
Well, you know, when I was growing up, we didn't have those great big stores like you have today. They had a little store on North 16th Street where we used to shop. And then finally they built a big Safeway. It was on the corner of our street. Then they took that away and they made something else. But they didn't have... A Jewish man ran that little store, and he was closed on Saturdays. So we used to get all our groceries from him other days, you know. Of course, we didn't go on Saturday like you do today. We didn't do that much, you know, growing up.
Did your father go to the synagogue often?
My father used to go to the synagogue, but when his mother passed away from cancer, and she was sick so many years, he didn't go anymore. He used to just stay home. My mother used to go down to visit her mother at the Kapor Shul. But we used to go to the shul on, not 18th and Burt, that was the Rosh Hashanah. We went to the other shul on 19th and, 18th and Burt and 19th and, you know, I can't remember. It's here, but I think I told you before, but I can't remember what it is now.
What do you remember about your high school years?
My high school years, they were hard. School was hard, but we got along okay. We used to always go down to Brandeis after school because we used to walk down there, and my uncle on my mother's side, her brother, used to take us home because his daughter went, so we all used to go to school. He used to take us home.
What did you study when you were at Central?
The basic things. I had Spanish, and I had algebra, and I had English. The basic things that you have to take when you go to high school. I took art also because I liked that. But
Were you a good student?
no, I wasn't a perfect student. It was hard for me. I mean, I didn't get all A's, but I didn't get D's either. I was an average student. Yeah. Not as good as my children. They were better students than I was. They were smarter. But my husband didn't go to Central. He went to Tech High School.
Tell me about your husband, about his growing up.
Well, he had a hard growing up. I'll tell you why. He lived with his grandparents and all his aunts and uncles because his mother remarried, and he couldn't go live with her, which he always wanted to, which he didn't get to do. So he and his sister was raised by his grandparents and his aunts and uncles. So it wasn't an easy growing up, you know.
What was his sister's name?
We called her Sissy, but her name was Labrina. But we called her Sissy. He's the one that did that. He couldn't say her name, so he called her Sissy. And I always stayed with her. She was always Sissy instead of Labrina. I don't think a lot of people knew what her name was. They thought it was Sissy. Sissy with a C-I-S-S-Y.
Did she live here in Omaha?
Yeah, they lived here for a long time. Then she got married, and then she and her husband and kids, they moved to Atlanta. And they lived there a long time. Then they came back, and then they moved to Kansas City. Then they came back. But she, unhappily, died of lung cancer at the home. So she was a heavy smoker. You know, I never smoked, and Marty quit smoking, my husband, when my oldest daughter was in nurse training. She came home and said, "Dad, you should see what I see." So he did quit. But
tell me more about his growing up.
Well, I didn't know that much about his growing up, to tell you the truth, but there were good times because they celebrated the holidays a lot, you know, good. They had a big family, and it was nice. But he missed being, you know, with his mother. His mother and father divorced when he was 3, and so then she stayed with him there. Then she remarried and went to live in Albuquerque. So he lived here with his grandparents and a couple aunts that were at the house. They used to live in an old house, a big house, on 2015 Cass. That was the address. But when they built the new interstate, they took the house. So it's no longer there. So they lived there for a long time, and then they bought a house on 52nd and Lafayette, right on the corner of a buff brick house. And they lived there, his grandparents. And his Aunt Rosie, Rose Steinberg, did you ever hear about her? Well, she was really a wonderful woman. She helped so many people, and she helped us. She was good to my kids. And she was good to my husband and his sister, very good. Mm-hmm.
What were his grandparents' names?
Nathan and Ida. Mm-hmm. And his grandmother had really, really bad neuralgia, and she used to always go up to Mayo Clinic. But she was a wonderful woman. She's a very kind woman. And he started the business. They had the scrap iron company on 10th and Harney. If he should see what's going on there now, he would be amazed, because the building they had is all changed. And then their works actually were down on 7th and Leavenworth, where they had everything, their scrap iron and stuff.
Did your husband work there growing up?
He worked there in the office. No, not growing up. After he got out of school, he worked there.
How did you meet your husband?
Well, you know what? He was a blind date at a party. My cousin Evelyn and her boyfriend, her boyfriend, Irv Charney, and my husband were very good friends. And they were going to this party at Reva Ruderman's. It used to be Reva Mann. She lived on 30-something Webster. So I went as a blind date to meet Marty, and I met him, and the next day that was it. Never went with anybody else again.
Was it love at first sight?
Yes, it was. Well, he was a very nice man. He was a very tender-hearted man. He would cry real easy, you know. But he was a nice man.
Tell me about him.
Well, he used to get mad sometimes, lose his temper. But most of the time he was very easygoing and nice. And he always wanted to get away from working there. So he tried a few things, but he always went back, because he said Aunt Rosie needed him. And I always say now, when he died, Aunt Rosie needed him upstairs. But he was a very tender-hearted man. And he and his sister, he used to laugh a lot when something was funny. He had this really loud laugh. And he used to sing a lot. We used to go for a ride in the car, and he would sing in the shower. He had a good voice, which was nice. And he went to the synagogue, and he always had what he called go up on the beam and do all kind, say something. But he was very fluent in reading everything, because he used to go all the time.
Were you still in high school when you first dated?
No, I was out of school. We were both out of school. We met in March of 1938. No, not March. I think May. Either March or May of 1938. It was a long time ago.
And how long did you go together before you were married?
4.5 years, because the Army took him in 1941. He had to go into the Army when he turned 18, He was past that then. He was 21, I think. So of all the kids we ran around with, he was the first one to go. So.
Do you remember much about where he went when he was in the Army?
Well, he went down in Texas Kansas, where they all go. I forgot the name of it, but that's where they went. And from there he went, that's yours? From there he went to different places. He went to Fort Benning for officers training, but he didn't make it, so they made him a sergeant and sent him to someplace in Oklahoma for the military police. So he was there for a long time, and then he got transferred to New Orleans. And we had gotten married when he came home on furlough in January 17th, 1942, we got married. We would have been married 64 years if he'd been alive. But anyway, I did go down there and stay there for a couple of years with him in New Orleans.
Did he ever go overseas?
He went overseas. When I came home, I had to come home because he was transferred. He was on a tanker, and he was the only Army man there. He had to protect some kind of stuff they were sending. So he did go to England, but he didn't stay there long. They sent him back again. Well, that was the only time he ever went overseas. But he was in the Army for 4.5 years. He was in the Army at New Orleans and Fort Worth, Texas, and Georgia, Fort Benning, and I don't know, he was in his basic training was, I think, in Fort Worth, Texas, because I did go down there to see him.
Tell me about your wedding.
My wedding was all of a sudden, we decided, he came home on a furlough, and we decided we're going to get married. So we got married at his grandparents' house, had a big house, had a small wedding, because it was wartime and all. And then he stayed home for a couple of days, and then he left, and I didn't see him again until I went down to join him in July of 42 in New Orleans.
Do you remember the rabbi at the wedding?
It was Rabbi Goldstein. He wasn't the wedding from Beth Israel. We always went to Beth Israel. But Marty's grandfather wanted Goldstein, so I didn't care. Didn't matter to me who was there.
Did you have any attendance at your wedding?
Not really, because we got married and I just came down the stairs. In the old house, they had a stairway that came down. Here was the living room and here was the dining room. It was a big house, 20th and Cass, 2015 Cass. It was a great big old house.
Did you have a special wedding dress for the day?
Well, I looked for something. I had gone shopping, couldn't find anything. So I had bought a new dress to have when he came home, so I wore that. It's kind of gray blue with, well, it's that dress I have on in that picture. It was kind of a grayish blue and had a kind of a wine-colored ribbon going down. And I remember I couldn't find any shoes, so my sister had gotten married the year before, and her shoes were that color as my ribbon, so I wore those shoes. Then I got a blue little hat with a veil to wear. But we didn't want to go into all that with a wedding gown now because we were having just the family. I was glad to get married then anyways.
Was there any kind of a dinner afterward?
Oh yeah, they made a big dinner. They had a big dinner. But I don't, to this day I don't remember what it was. And they had dancing and stuff in the other room, so it was nice. But it rained that afternoon, and then it was really a nice warm day. It was January 17th, but it was warm, and then it rained a little bit. I think it turned to icy a little bit, just like her wedding that night.
Did you have anyone stand up for you in the wedding?
I don't remember. Probably my sister. Mm-hmm.
And how about your husband? Did he have somebody?
Probably his friend Irv.
Irv?
Charney. Mm-hmm.
Now tell me about when he got out of the Army.
Well, he got out of the Army in 1945, 4.5 years later. And we were living with my mother then because I had Nancy, my oldest girl, while he was gone, And he came home when she was 9 months old for good. But I lived there with my parents and my sister and her husband. She had well, they lived there. Luckily, we had enough room. That house had 4 bedrooms, and so we had enough room there. But it was kind of hard on my folks having 2 daughters there with their kids. And Nancy, when she was born, when she was 5 weeks old, she had pneumonia and had to go back to the hospital. So I almost lost her, but luckily she was okay. But Marty didn't come home till she was 9 months old. He was stationed somewhere else, but you know what? Right now I can't remember where it was.
After you got married and he was gone, did you work?
Yeah, I worked for Parker Furnace Company on 20th and Grace. I was working there. After I got out of high school, I got a job there. And then I left there and I went to work for Mifflin Lumber. And I worked for Mifflin Lumber until I left to go to live in New Orleans.
What was your job at Parker Furnace?
Just working, doing office work for him. Just a little place. It wasn't very good there, Just on the corner of 23rd Grace. Well, Milton Parker died. He inherited the business, and his brother Eddie had died earlier, and his mother died, so there wasn't anybody anymore from them. But I think their father, it was Dave Parker, he sold the business. No, that's not true. Milton ran it for a long time until he passed away. That's right.
Then when you went to Mifflin, what was your job?
Oh, various office work, and worked on the speaker, on the phone, and I cut off the two bosses one time.
Who was your boss? Who were they?
Well, I don't remember now, but I think Coombe worked there, and Joe Gus worked there, and I don't remember who else worked there. Mifflin himself worked there. I think they cut him off. I don't remember, but I cut off a few people when I was learning the switchboard. But you do those things when you learn. You can't learn real fast. And Ida Ruth Poster was working there, and she left, and I took her job. Yeah.
How long did you work at Mifflin?
Well, I didn't work there long because I went to join my husband in July. So I worked there a few months.
How about when you got to New Orleans? Were you doing any work?
Well, it was hard to find a place in those days. They called it a tourist court. They didn't call it, what they call it today. But we stayed there and turned on the lights one night, and the whole ceiling was covered with bugs. So we found another place, not an apartment, because you couldn't find just a room and a bath, and I could share a kitchen if I wanted to. So I wandered around one day, and I went into Maison Blanche. It's a department store, and I got a job there, not as sales lady, but working up in the office. So that's what I did. I worked there for a long time. Then we came home on a furlough. When I came back, I was running a electric bookkeeping machine, and I did very well. But they took it away from me, and they put me on another job. Well, I decided I didn't like that, so I went to work for Port of Embarkation, and I worked there, and then they sent me to Jackson Barracks where my husband was stationed, but in a different office. And when I worked there, I made Army payroll. That was my job. So I worked there until I came home.
After you got home, did you do any work?
No, because I was pregnant with my oldest daughter then. But I went to the library a lot, and I went to all these classes and stuff like that. Took the bus streetcar. In those days, we had streetcars. You don't remember streetcars, do you? Yeah. Well, yeah, you should remember them. Yeah, when my husband and I were dating, we took the streetcar because he didn't have a car in those days. Once in a while, his aunt gave him the car, but not very often.
Did he end up growing up with his grandparents?
Oh, yeah. He stayed there until he went into the service. And then when he came back, we lived at my mother's for a while until we found a place to live. Then we moved when my daughter was a couple of years old. But places were hard to find after the war. They didn't have any. It wasn't only that you couldn't find them. They weren't available,
Where did you end up finding an apartment?
On 60th and 60th by Elmwood Park, there was a little apartment. My sister lived there then, and it had been a store or something. They made it into apartments, and we lived there. We lived there for a while, and then Ronnie was born, so we moved back to where my mother used to live, and we lived in the Fairfax Apartments. I could look down and see her house from my porch. So we lived there for a while. And then we moved to 1443 South 54th Street. We bought a house there.
During those years, was your husband working with the family business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the office?
In the office. And part-time I would help with other things too. Mm-hmm.
Did he spend the rest of his years working there?
Yes, until he got sick. But by that time they had closed the office because Grandpa was gone and Aunt Rosie was sick, and so they closed the office. Aunt Vicky came from New York and she ran it for a little while, but then that was the end of it after that. And then when Marty passed away, she ran it a little while and she got sick herself, so that was the end of it. 1019 Harney was the address, and 7th and Leavenworth was where they kept all the scrap and everything. It's so different there now. I couldn't even find where their office was because it's so changed.
After your first daughter, who did you have?
I had Ronnie. He was our son, and he was born in 1948. But he was a good kid, and he went to UNO, but it wasn't UNO then. It was just Omaha University, and he went there to school. He didn't want to go out of town, but my older daughter went out of town. And Denise, she went out of town to Lincoln. She went to Lincoln. But Nancy went to the first year the University of Minnesota and the second year to Barnes Hospital School of Nursing in St. Louis, which is now just Barnes College. Then she went to St. Louis University and got her degree. And then she went to New York and taught at the Beth Israel Hospital. And then she went to California and got her master's. She got from the government, they paid for it all. And she stayed there, and she's still there. But she never married.
Did your son go to college?
Yeah, he went to Omaha University, which is UNO now. He went to work for the phone company, and he worked for part-time when he went to school, and then he got a full-time job, and he stayed with them for 25 years. But he got transferred to Denver, so he lived in Denver. But he was a great bass fisherman. He got all kind of trophies. He had his own bass boat when he lived in Omaha. They had a bass club, and on the cover of the one outdoor magazine is a picture of him in a boat. Yeah, he was a great bass fisherman. He loved that sport. But my brother-in-law, Jerry, who was married to my sister, he was a fisherman too. Mm-hmm.
And then your next child?
The third one was Denise. This one is sitting right here.
Tell me about her.
Well, I was glad she came along because we never thought we'd have 3 children. I was glad because I really needed another child. Now I wish I'd had another one, but those days, you think you could have as many children as you want, but can you afford them? But she was fine. She went to Lincoln and to school, and she was okay.
Now, how many grandchildren do you have?
I have 2 girls, thank goodness, because they had 2 girls. Because Nancy never married, and Ronnie happened to marry girls that never could have any children. And he was divorced from his first wife, and before he passed away, 3 years before, he had married Sherry, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia now. But she's a very sweet girl, and I hear from her all the time. In fact, today's her birthday. I'll probably call her again later. And my first daughter-in-law, she too was couldn't have any children, and they were married 10 years. But she comes to see me every time she comes here, and she calls me and she remembers my birthday. She's a very pretty girl.
Now tell me about Denise's family.
Denise's family, she has the 2 girls, Marissa and Amanda. And Amanda is in in Bloomington. She goes to school there. She a junior, yes. And Marissa is in Houston. She's studying to be a nurse. And she's the older one. She's 23, right? And Amanda just turned 21. So thank goodness she had 2 girls. So I have 2 grandchildren. And they're beautiful girls. I had beautiful handwriting when I was in the 8th grade and all through. but I don't now because I can't. But my handwriting wasn't too. But when you went to grade school, in all those grades, they used to give you a red big star or a blue. Finally, when you got to the top, you got a gold. And we had a Mr. Savage and Miss Reynolds. And Mr. Savage was the head of the writing, and Miss Reynolds, she was also. And they would come and give you writing lessons when I was in grade school. And so I did get a gold thing with a big thing on it saying that I was okay. My handwriting proved to be one of the good ones. But the problem is my dad threw it all out one time, and I was saving it all for years. He threw away a lot of stuff that I was saving. And I was an avid movie going in those days. And I used to buy all those movie stars magazines and put them in big scrapbooks. I used to like Ruby Keeler and Dick Powell in those 42nd Street movies, the old movies, which you can see today sometimes. But he threw all that stuff out that I had saved all those years. Because he decided one day I'll clean up the attic in his house. And all our stuff was there. He not only threw my stuff away, he threw everybody's stuff away. Which is too bad because they were mementos which I would like to have kept, But that's the way. Oh, and I have a thimble collection if you haven't noticed. If you look in the back of you, right there and there, I collect thimbles from all over. And I get them. The children brought them back to me. My niece was in China. She brought me one. And I have them from Australia, and I have it from China, and I have it from, all the states and, United States. And where else? Rome, and Italy, and England, France. I have all that up there on the wall. And I have more, but I don't have any space for them.
Tell me a little bit about your life after you lost your husband.
Well, it was pretty bad because he was sick a long time, I took off. In March, they diagnosed it as pancreatic cancer. So I didn't quit my job. They gave me a leave of absence. So it was pretty hard. But, he used to drive himself to the hospital to get chemo because I couldn't drive. But he did fine. Up until his last day, he drove himself to the hospital. And he would go to University Hospital to get his chemo. But before he got sick, he looked so young. He had all his hair. He had a lot of hair, and it hadn't turned gray. But he lost all that weight, But life was pretty hard then, but we did what we could, He didn't stay in the hospital. And in those days, they didn't have what they have now. What do they call it? When they help you out when you have cancer. What do you call it, Denise?
Hospice.
Hospice. But they didn't have that then. I think they were just starting, but life was kind of difficult afterwards because it's hard to be alone in a house, by yourself. But I stayed there in that house alone for 27 years. I think Ronnie stayed with me for a little while before when he was moving to Denver. But otherwise, but it was okay. It worked out all right. And Denise was here, so it was all right. And you make do. You don't like it, but you make do. But it was difficult because, he was my boyfriend, then he was my husband. And we depended a lot on each other, And he was very good to me. But he used to go on Thursday night and do the shopping. Well, I made Shabbos dinner for Friday. And I worked, and I'd come home and fix dinner. So we always had a Shabbos dinner, always. In all the years that I lived in that house, maybe once when I was alone, but I always made chicken soup, and made kugel, everything. And I always had a cake on Friday or something for dessert. The kids always knew that on Friday there was going to be dessert, plus a big dinner. But I wasn't working when they were little. I didn't go. Were you? I thought you were in junior high school when I went to work, Denise. I went to work for Brandeis, and they put me in the toy department, and I had never been a sales girl before. In fact, the lady said to me the other day, she said, "Will you trade with me?" She said, and I was supposed to go work in the basement, and I said, "Yeah, I'd rather be upstairs than in the basement." But it turned out to be the toy department. Well, if that's a busy place to go for Christmas, it was, but I managed all right. And then they put me to work in the linen department, because in those days they had one linen sale or two, not like they do today. And I stayed there for a while. Then the buyer came and said, "We'd like to have you work all the time," so I went to work there in the linen department. I stayed there until they closed in 1980. Well, I had a leave of absence from March until about August when Marty passed away. But they didn't take that off of my record, because when I quit, when I retired after 20 years, I got all my benefits. I still get a pension, and I also get my discount, even though it's Yonkers took over. They sold, brand I sold to Yonkers, and Yonkers has been sold many times, but I don't know who they're with now. But I mean, they were good to me, and I enjoyed the work and got along fine. So I used to take the bus to work, and then Marty used to come and pick me up. Then afterwards, I used to take the bus and transfer on 52nd and Leavenworth, and then they took that bus up, so I would walk from 52nd and Leavenworth to where I lived. It was about 7 or 8 blocks, but I didn't mind. I was well then, But when you don't feel good, it's a different story. But I've always been well. I never was sick too much when the kids were growing up. Do you remember I never was sick. Well, when I was there, one year I helped with the Mother's Day. In fact, I have a picture that somebody sent me recently. And I did that. And then I would take on different things that they wanted me to do, like maybe I would... Oh, I know, when they published the book, their cookbook, I didn't have anything there, but I went around to get ads for the cookbook. I did that. And different times when they had a program, I would take care of it, Then I ran the gift shop, and that time they didn't have a place. I used to bring everything home to my apartment. That's when we lived in the apartment on 16th there. And then I'd bring it back to the Beth Israel and go there on Sunday morning. Marty would take me, because the kids went to Sunday school and Hebrew school there. So I ran that, and different times when they'd have a program or they'd have a maid dinner or something, I would help with all that. So.
Were you involved with the gift shop?
Yeah, I ran the gift shop at that time, because I used to take everything home with me. We didn't even have a place for it like they do today. In fact, I have not even been to the new synagogues yet, one of these days. But I can't get around that well anymore, so I don't go to too many places. Denise takes me out, But we had good times at Bethlehem. One time Eddie Cantor came for a big dinner they had. In fact, I had a book with his name on it. I think I have it somewhere. And they had different people come to some of their big dinners, And we used to have really... Denise her wedding was at Beth Israel. But in the old building. But I remember the dedication when they built that building on 52nd. Marty's grandfather was one of the originators of Beth Israel when they were 8 in Chicago. So, but the gift shop was... Well, I could do it then. I wasn't working or anything, and so I did it. But doing different plays and different times they had you'd have to get some ads for different books and stuff. So it was nice. And I was there a lot because the kids went to school there, Hebrew school, in Sunday school. So we spent a lot of time there and then they'd have like a big dinner or dance. So we'd go to that. I'd like to close by saying my thank you to my daughter Denise for all she does for me. I love her. I love you very much, and your whole family. And Nancy, who's in California, in San Francisco, I know you work hard. I love you very much too. And being the oldest is a little difficult, I imagine, for you. But then on the other hand, you've always been so good to me. Thank you for all your favors and thinking of me. Even last week you sent me those beautiful flowers. Thank you. And Marissa, thank you, honey. I talked to you the other day, and I love you too. And Amanda, thank you. I got your note the other day. I love you too.